Welcome to another episode of the SPP, the Sunday Punch podcast. We are here with Aidan Grogan. Forgot your name. It's been too long, dude. Aidan Grogan. We're going to be talking about some important topics today. Conservatism versus being a liberal versus being a libertarian. I think there's some good distinctions, and it's all kind of blurred lines nowadays anyway. So, and then we'll talk about the terrible mass shooting in Texas and the arguments that are happening now, and do our best to offer some other ideas and be as kind of I don't want to lean any one way or the other, so I would like to just offer some good ideas. Before we get into that, we'll play a little Friday night, and then we'll start talking about it. Sound good?
Friday night, I'm thinking that we just might fly away to someplace they don't know who we are. Now I'm riding shotgun in your car. We drive through the city like explorers going 65. Flowing hair flying across your face. We left on Friday, now it's Saturday. Pressed jeans buttoned up, jeans iron slipping up. Red shoes walking slow, headphones blaring 3 stacks. Sunglasses flaring out, thick watch hanging low. Studded belt pulled taut, 3 stacks on the radio. Friday night, I'm thinking that we just might run away to some place we can be who we are. We can be who we are.
Okay, where do you want to start, bud?
Oh, well, we could start with the traditional conservatism versus classical liberalism debate.
Yeah, I was watching that video of yours. Check it out on YouTube. Type in Aidan Grogan, you can see.
Yeah, my channel is currently called Lineum Vitae, which is it's a Latin phrase, means tree of life.
Okay.
Just for purposes of keeping my name a little concealed right now, I changed the name.
Okay.
My Rumble name is still the same, but on YouTube it's LIGMUN or NUMVITAE.
I heard that, you were having some trouble with YouTube.
Yep, I've had total of 4 of my videos deleted by YouTube, either for so-called medical misinformation or cyberbullying and harassment, whatever that's supposed to mean. I guess if you criticize Bill Gates, that's cyberbullying. But yeah, I had 2 strikes on the channel, and if they randomly deleted one more video, then my channel would have been terminated. So I unlisted every video for a couple weeks just so they wouldn't delete any of them. But everything's back public now. I've got back down to 1 strike instead of 2 strikes. So we're good for now.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. I would hate... I enjoy your videos, and then they're not controversial at all.
Yeah.
So if anybody wants to check them out, they're very, very well researched, and I think they do a good job of, especially this one, the conservatism versus liberal, and then the whole history behind it was very interesting. So yeah, break it down. Give us the history and where we are today.
Yeah, so the point I was making with the video is that there's really a debate on the political right in America and other Western countries between traditional conservatism and classical liberalism. Now, American conservatives generally don't understand that they're actually just defending the classical liberal principles upon which the United States was founded. Those being free market capitalism, individual liberty. So the idea of free speech, the right to bear arms, the right to privacy, due process of law, the rule of law, that's all liberalism. That comes out of the Enlightenment liberal consensus. Now, generally, anybody would agree with those principles. Any reasonable person would say we need free speech, we need right to privacy, we need due process of law. But there's also other ideas stemming from the Enlightenment that, have proved to be fundamentally false. So, for example, It's commonly thought that man is a blank slate. And this was a popular conception of John Locke, who was an English political philosopher, tremendously influential on Thomas Jefferson, as well as the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was also influential on the founding fathers of the United States. So essentially, the blank slate says that man doesn't have any real human nature. You come into the world just as a literal blank slate, and everything that becomes of you in terms of personality, behavior is all socialization. So a popular Enlightenment conviction then was that man is flawed because of the influence of government or bad education or religion or nationalism, et cetera, et cetera. And so in order to perfect man, we have to eliminate various institutions which they believe have contributed to man being corrupt. So you'll see this all up until Karl Marx, the inventor of communism, that we must get rid of the nuclear family. We must get rid of all nations. We must get rid of religion so that man can be free. So conservatives in the United States, I think if they want to get anywhere, they have to, first of all, recognize that they're not actually defending traditionally conservative values. They're defending classical liberalism, and then try to decide what are they going to keep from classical liberalism and what are they going to throw out. Because I'll just add, traditional conservatism is hierarchy, authority, order. And liberalism, in the classical sense, says there's something often flawed with hierarchy, authority, order, tradition. So the institutions must be fixed in some way. And then the sort of radical leftism, the revolutionary faith, as it is, of the Jacobins in France or the Marxists, says all institutions are predicated on power. Everything is hierarchy and corruption. And so to hell with it all, we have to burn it all down.
And where do you fall?
So I fall somewhere between the classical liberal worldview and the traditional conservative worldview. So I think there's merit to having a state that recognizes we adhere to this specific faith. Now, not everyone has to adhere to it, but we kind of put it up as a symbol saying this is our heritage, this is our culture. So we're going to have religious symbols in government. Mm-hmm. And then I think also this classical liberal dogmatic devotion to the free market is extremely flawed. And traditional conservatives tend not to place the market as the supreme ethic. They think that, well, actually the well-being of your nation, family, community, faith, that all comes before economics and GDP growth and material prosperity. So I'm really somewhere in between classical liberalism and traditional conservatism.
So that's my confusion, because I always thought that being a conservative meant that I only believe in the free market, as little government interference as possible, although I would say, of my current understanding, that traditional conservatives do want the government to get involved in, let's say, abortion or beforehand the legalization of marijuana, right?
Yep.
Because those are threatening like values.
Right.
Whereas a libertarian would then take it one step further and say, I don't even want the government involved in that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so I've always thought that conservatives were, and libertarians were, free market trumps all, leave it up to the states, federal government, less spending, less taxes.
Yeah, that's the American brand of conservatism, dating back really to the founding. But in the traditional, really European sense of conservatism, it's not, because it comes out of the revolutionary period. So as I was saying, that liberalism saw government as a threat to the individual. And then in some cases, the family and religion are threats to the individual. So conservatives in America are defending the original liberal idea that government is a threat to the individual, so we must shrink government. Leftists, Marxists, Jacobins, socialists, they regard not only the government, but also the nuclear family, religion, church, even community and nations as all being threats to the individual. And so what's interesting about Marxism is that the end goal is to actually abolish the government, because man will apparently be so perfected that you won't even need a government anymore. So traditional conservatives, or I'm sorry, classical liberals who are conservatives in America, they set themselves as saying, we want less government. The lefties want more government, which is true, because they only want more government so they have the power to rearrange society before they get rid of the state completely. That's the Marxist dream of a utopia. So all of liberalism is an attempt to make the individual more free. And that's conservatives and liberals in the United States are just arguing that from different perspectives. The conservatives say the biggest threat to the individual comes from the state. The liberals are saying the biggest threat to the individual comes from communities, i.e. church, family, nations, etc.
So you think that the liberals of today have been radicalized? Yes.
So it's because they're sort of acting out the worldview of Karl Marx or Adam Weishaupt, who was the founder of the Illuminati, which we spoke about in a different podcast. This revolutionary fervor, this idea that we're going to tear down all these flawed or oppressive institutions, we're going to fundamentally restructure society, and this assumption that we can actually create a utopia. And this is everything that the left says with attacking their opponents. You're racist, you're sexist, you're homophobic. It always implies that there's going to be some world utopia where we all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. They think that that's possible. And that's the revolutionary tradition. That's the Marxist Illuminati idea that we can erect a Tower of Babel. We can have one world, one dream.
And so what do you think are the main influences? I've always wondered this, as you grow up, let's break it down. There's probably whatever your family is probably what you most likely, unless you use that as like a turn of rebellion. Your social group, as you go through college, there's a statistic of as you become higher educated, the more quote unquote progressive or liberal you become. I'm trying to think of some others, but what do you think are like the main factors in what determines and what do you think most people are actually? I mean, everyone I know has to me a very simplistic view on all of these different issues.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
What determines political orientation is large. It's partially genetic, and it comes down to your temperament, and your temperament is often it's influenced by your family, but it's part of your nature because it's your family, and so what you find, there's been many psychology studies on this. Conservatives are low in trait openness and they're high in trait conscientiousness. So there's the big five personality traits: openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So conservatives, low in openness. So they're not typically very intellectual or creative types of people historically, but they're very conscientious. So they know how to follow the rules. They're very structured, morally grounded people, and they don't really disturb society. They're not out there breaking windows, breaking into cars, rioting like the left does. Now the liberals, on the other hand, it's literally the opposite. They are high in openness but low in conscientiousness. So they want to break the rules. They want to stir things up. They're more interested in abstract ideas, new philosophies. I think that's getting a bit skewed today, because if the liberals were so open, then why do they shut down speakers that they disagree with? Why do they censor opposing views on the internet. So obviously they're not very open. So now because now they have so much power, they're like shifting into a totalitarian, a control freak mindset. But so I think that most conservatives in the United States, despite the fact that they're defending classical liberalism, actually are the traditional conservative personality type. They just haven't realized it yet, because even conservatives in America who love their guns and their trucks and they fly their American flag, they're hardworking people. They go to work early, they provide for their families, maybe they go to church. So they're very disciplined, orderly people. But I think through the influence of conservative think tanks that really just broadcast this very simplistic free market message, American conservatives haven't really explored deep into the ideas to realize that some of these classical liberal ideas are flawed and actually work against their best interests.
Mm-hmm.
So
now, there seems to be this radicalization of both sides. So you have, the Antifa or the alt-right, and it's all being very radicalized. I'm sure social media has an impact on that. I was just watching Vice last night with about Dick Cheney, and I'm sure that's skewed as well. But I did look this up. Is when he basically nixed this bill that made the media have to kind of balance both sides, so there was a check and balance with the government. Mm-hmm. So he nixed that, and that was the creation of Fox News, which then created MSNBC. And so now you have no more news. It's just basic opinion, like people like us, but, trying to get as much controversy out of a statement. Do you think people are as radicalized as it makes it seem, or do you think they just get the most attention?
I don't think that there's radicalism on the right, except for a small sliver of people who are fed up with the current system. But the left has been the main driving force of radicalism in the United States. So if you look at the sort of political compass in the United States over the past 50 years, the left is consistently moving more and more towards the left, and they actually drag the right with them. So the right is constantly giving ground to the left. So for instance, the left got gay marriage legalized in 2015, and the conservatives at the time were saying, we don't support this. That's not a marriage. But then you notice, like, within 1 year, they completely dropped the whole gay marriage thing. And then you had Donald Trump saying in 2016 that he supports gay marriage, and he had the pride flag on stage, like, look at me. So,
well, I've always said Donald Trump's probably the most liberal.
He was, yeah.
Was,
and that was the irony of him being called this super right wing fascist. Yeah. He was basically a centrist populist.
So, what did you mentioned this in your video? So, you mentioned Donald Trump did some things right, but some things wrong by being, Americanist versus being a globalist. Mm-hmm. So I could kind of explain that, because that was an interesting point.
So for those who remember Donald Trump's, it was his RNC speech in 2016, he said, Americanism, not globalism, will be our credo. And the crowd went wild. But the irony is that Americanism is fundamentally globalism. And it's difficult for people to understand that, because when they hear Americanism, they think that means America first. But the American system as it exists in the world is a force for globalism, because what America does is it goes to countries with governments that we don't like. We overthrow those governments and try to institute a secular liberal democracy. That's globalism. America is the driving force of free markets, capitalism around the world. The biggest businesses in the world that do business everywhere, they come from the United States. The United States is remaking the world in its own image. And Ireland is the best example, because this is a traditionally Catholic country, a unique culture dating back thousands of years. But since they joined the EU in the 90s, and all these American businesses like Bank of America and many others, went there to do business. Now, a city like Dublin is looking a lot more like New York City or Chicago. There's these big glass buildings, skyscrapers, all this modern architecture. The fashion's changing, the culture's changing, the people are changing. Now they bring in all these migrants, so it's becoming much more international, multicultural, multi-ethnic. So people need to understand that is Americanism. That's what America does on the world stage. It tries to remake everyone in our own image. Now, there's people who would say, well, isn't America a force for good because it makes everyone richer, it makes everyone more free? And that is an argument that needs to be made. But I think if it's done at the expense of getting rid of cultures and sort of deracinating people, undermining their faith, their traditions, their heritage, and just sort of making them into disposable consumer and units of production, that there's nothing good in the long run about that. It's making the world a shopping mall, essentially.
Mm-hmm. So you you mentioned in your video of where we can go from here, and use, I believe it was Hungary as an example.
Yeah. So Hungary and Poland. So those are two, liberal democracies. They are immersed in the modern liberal paradigm insofar as they are democratic. They are free societies. They don't have a monarchy. They're not autocracies. They don't have a state-run church. But they are and despite being in the European Union and working with the international order, they're holding on to their traditions. They recognize that they are unique cultures. They speak a specific language. They have a certain heritage that they want to defend. So they're not allowing the EU and the UN and other NGOs to dump millions of migrants in their countries. They're building actual walls and setting up actual security systems to not allow anyone to just pour in. So, and they've done all that without having to regress back to some, I guess, very far right, traditionally conservative system of government. So, and one point I made in the video is that there's a lot of young men, although a very small minority on the right, who are becoming extremely traditionally conservative, and they want an absolute monarchy. They want a state-run religion. And my issue with that is, in order for that to happen, you would have to force millions and millions of people who are so far divorced from that for hundreds of years of history to live within your ideal conception of a state. And that will only result in violence, bloodshed, civil war. And this book, A Study of History by Arnold J. Toynbee, goes into detail about how when a civilization is collapsing, you have these people who start to fetishize the long past. They say these were the glory days, this was the golden age, and we need to bring that back. So you get really intellectual people who get very romantic, and then they want to sort of resurrect it. And then what they end up doing is they have to force everyone to live within the values and the ethics and the system of law of a era that's long gone, and it never works.
Well, that's kind of what Donald Trump ran on. So would it be dangerous if he ran again and won?
Well, the difference between what Donald Trump ran on, well, it was the interesting thing is it was tapping into that sentiment, because people sense that America is collapsing. We're in this age of decadence. The social fabric's coming apart. So when Trump says "Make America Great Again," these older people, especially the baby boomers, they think back to the 70s and the 80s when they were having a great time, and the country just seemed like it was much more prosperous, much more socially cohesive. But when Trump says "Make America Great Again," of course, he's saying make America an economic powerhouse again, make it a proud nation again. He's not saying we need to revert back 100 years.
Okay.
So I don't think there's any danger in that statement. And his I assume he's going to run again, and his campaign is just "Save America." So I think that's a pretty stupid slogan.
Now, would you like him back on Twitter like I would?
I would love him back on Twitter, yes.
Oh, man, this is going to be brutal the next race. But
Oh, yeah.
okay. Any dark horses that should be considered? I think we've talked about this before, but everyone keeps telling me, all my friends, oh no, Donald Trump, he'll be indicted or arrested. No, he won't. And he pretty much has all of the leverage in his case. So it's just going to be, I believe, Biden and Trump again, right? Running.
I think so. Yeah. Because some podcast, you probably know the podcast. I can't remember their name, but they interviewed Trump at Mar-a-Lago a couple months ago. They were in there just dressed like in their pajamas, pretty much drinking beer with Trump in his suit, and they asked him outright, is he going to run? And he's like, well, I can't say anything yet because of the campaign finance stuff, but a lot of people are going to be really happy. So I think he just announced that he's running without announcing it.
All right, we'll see how that plays out. Now, you mentioned an interesting point. What was that? John Locke, who said born as a blank slate, right? And so you want to get rid of religion. So he wanted to get rid of the nuclear family too?
No, so it depends on which philosopher you're referring to. John Locke, I haven't read too much into him, but he thought that for the first years of your life, there's nothing innate within you. Everything is just learned. So it's all socially conditioned. I'm not saying that he wanted to break up the family, but other Enlightenment thinkers, especially the more feminist types of thinkers like Mary Wollstonecraft, who shared this blank slate idea, thought that all these problems in the world are because of men oppress women, and the nuclear family is a creation of men to oppress women, to subjugate them. Then they'll claim that others will claim that the government is the biggest oppressor of the people. We must get rid of government. So that's more of the, I guess, a illuminist Marxist idea, but which, again, people think that Marxism automatically means big government, which it does initially, but the goal is to eventually get rid of government. So depending on which philosopher you're referring to, some were more radical than others. But if they share this idea that man is a blank slate and that you are the product of your environment, that implies that you can train people to act in any desired way. So you could get rid of the family, you could get rid of the state, you could get rid of all nations, and you just have to properly educate and sort of brainwash people to act good, whatever your definition of good it happens to be.
Well, I only bring that up because I want to make the transition into the mass shootings and the rise of mass shootings. Mm-hmm. And I know in your video about that, you mentioned having this kind of, the loss of the nuclear family and some of these things of, I believe you mentioned also of having, the Christianity as like our culture of being, this is our religion. And maybe that could be, brought back into the schools, that was taken out of the schools.
Right.
And so if that's the foundation that you go, because everybody jumps to not to, be, I don't even know, I don't want to be, I forget the word, but everyone goes to the smoking gun, basically,
right,
which is the last thing, which is, okay, this isn't about the foundational cause of mass shootings. It's the very last step of mass shootings. And that's, it has to be AR-15s. Now, I would like to state, do people need an AR-15? No. To me, no, you don't. The NRA loves them because they're super profitable. And sure, yes, I see the freedom argument, but to me, it's like, if that's the case, then I should be able to buy a bazooka too. If we're going to go all the way, then I'd rather go all the way with it, because then it's like, okay, we could form our own militia and fight the government. It all goes into the extreme of let's fight the government. So
right.
If that's the case, then I should be able to buy a tank and a bazooka and all this shit then.
Yeah.
But to me, that's not the case. So the fact that you can then buy an AR-15 to me is like one step away from a bazooka.
Right. So I have a few things to say about that. So I used to be a big Second Amendment enthusiast, and I still do defend the Second Amendment. Um, but what's interesting about the Second Amendment is the conception behind it is that the people need to have firepower that could match that of the government. So in case they did have to overthrow the government, they'd be able to do that. Now that was possible in the 1700s because it was just muskets and cannons. So, but from about, well, the post-Civil War period, once you started getting these very, very sophisticated, high-powered weapons that would then be used in World War One, the people in this country simply did not have firepower that would match that of the state. The state has fighter jets that can drop bombs
Right.
and flatten a whole village, and you've got your AR-15. So the whole concept of the Second Amendment, unfortunately, is becoming superfluous because the people in this country would only be able to fight a guerrilla war, and with the national security apparatus that's being set up, they're not going to stand a chance. Eventually, they're all going to be routed out and defeated. But to tie
my main point is, yes, should the AR-15, no one needs one. That being said, that doesn't answer the question of, okay, why is someone being motivated to go into a shopping mall or a school or a church and do this? And if we ban AR-15s, they're still going to have guns,
and they could make bombs.
Right. So I think it all starts at the foundation of why is this happening?
Right.
And no one starts at the foundation. We all go to the simplest, which is human nature. If we did this super simple thing, then this would eliminate school shootings and church shootings. And to me, it's much more evil than that. It's like, what is the foundational influence that's causing people to think, you know what's a good idea? I'm going to go shoot a bunch of kids in a school.
Yeah. So one thing I'll say starting off here, then I'll get into that psychology of why they do it. So the liberals assume that the accessibility of firearms and the capacity of firearms to inflict mass casualties is a new phenomenon. They think that rose in accordance with the frequency of the mass shootings. And liberals are supposed to be the smart people who understand history. And if that was the case, then they would understand that World War I, over 100 years ago, was an industrial slaughterhouse on a mass scale. So the availability of fully automatic firearms that can mow down tons of people in a very short amount of time have existed for about 100 years. So I made the point in the video. In the 1920s, a kid could have gone into a high school with a Tommy gun, with a drum magazine, that's what the mobsters used, and mowed down their classmates. But it didn't happen. And the study I cited, Journal of Family Studies, whatever it was called, there were no mass shootings in the 1940s or 50s or 60s. And then at the end of the 70s, it was 1979, then it started happening. And it was very rare. But then once Columbine happened, you got all these copycats. And so the past 20 years now, they've just been increasing. But the accessibility of firearms and the capability of firearms to inflict mass casualties hasn't changed. So something changed culturally. And that's why I made the case that in all the schools before the 60s, they would pray, even in public schools. So there was this idea that there actually is a standard of right and wrong. It's not just your opinion of what's right and what's wrong. There's a God, and he is the author of morality. And then I cited a couple of those court cases in my latest video. And then they threw out the 10 Commandments from the schools officially in 1980. That was a court case with Kentucky because they wanted to mandate that all the schools had the 10 Commandments. Now, what's interesting about the 10 Commandments, even if you're secular, even if you're not religious, you can still agree with what the 10 Commandments say. It says, you're not God, don't kill, don't steal, don't cheat on your spouse, don't bear false witness. So they're very common sense morals. And you throw that out, and then within just a few years, you have Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, at least Eric Harris, claiming that he's a god. He feels like a god, and he wants to kill all humans. And so this is where I want to get into the philosophy of why they do it. Because people say, how could someone do this? How could they kill a bunch of innocent children? Well, it's because these people, they have no foundations, as you were saying. They have no sense of right and wrong. They believe that they're God, and they're nihilistic. They're very, very pissed off at the structure of the universe. They don't have a father in the home typically. And so they decide that, well, life is not worth living. Not only my own, but everyone else's is also meaningless. So they go out with this statement where they want to inflict as much death and as much carnage on the world before they say goodbye. And that's why they always cap themselves off at the end. So it's a profoundly religious statement that they're making, despite the fact that we're in a secular culture. You have these mass shooters, in many cases, saying something that is profoundly religious. And Eric Harris, who shot up Columbine, was the perfect example of it. He set himself up as the supreme judicator over all existence. And he declared that the human race is not worth fighting for. It's only worth killing. He said, give the earth back to the animals. And he thought he was superior because he had come to this grandiose realization and thought it was his mission to try to kill as many people. He didn't forgive, he didn't forget. He wrote that in his journal. They're very disturbing journals. You can find them online, everything he said. And people ask, why would they do this? Well, go read the journal, and they say exactly why they did it. They hate the human race. They want to kill everybody. And what's interesting, because I really emphasize the point of the loss of Christian morality in the schools. The first person who was killed in this chain reaction of mass shootings was a girl named Rachel Scott at Columbine High School. And Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold had teased her before about her religious faith because she was a devout Christian. And she had this idea where she would, a little act of kindness would have ripple effects. It would cause a chain reaction, and you would sort of spread goodness throughout the cosmos. And Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, meanwhile, were making videos saying they wanted to start a chain reaction of mass shootings. They wanted to start a chain reaction of death and carnage. So right when they entered school grounds on April 20th, 1999, they shot her as she was sitting outside eating lunch, and she was on the ground wounded. And they went up to her and said, do you still believe in God? And she said, I do. And then they shot her dead. So that was the first victim. Now, what's crazy, there were 12 students who were killed on that day, plus one teacher. And that day, in one of her classes, Rachel Scott was drawing a pair of eyes that were crying. And there were literally 13 tears, which watered a blooming flower, a columbine, whatever. I don't know the flower names. And then she wrote on the wall in her house that was discovered later that one day her message would impact millions of people. She wrote in her journal 1 year before her death, I think April 20th, 1998. She wrote in her journal, my last year, thank you, God. So all these supernatural things happened surrounding her death. And then her funeral was broadcasted on CNN. And her message did have these sort of ripple effects throughout the culture. All these people heard of her story, then read her journals and were inspired by it. So you have something that is actually religious and spiritual going on with these mass shootings, but no one wants to look into it. And I think no one wants to look into it because it's religious, and we don't have religion in our culture anymore. So, and Rachel Scott's father, after the shooting, when he did a hearing in Congress and they asked him about gun control, and he said, this doesn't have anything to do with gun control. This goes all the way back to Cain and Abel in the Bible. This is about someone who is fed up with existence and wants to avenge God by destroying creation. That's Eric Harris. And same thing with the psycho who shot up a sorority house in Isla Vista, Elliot Rodger. He did a video the day before he went on a rampage and killed 6 people where he said humanity is a disgusting, depraved species, and if he had it in his power, he would stop at nothing to reduce everyone to mountains of skulls and rivers of blood. So again, they're out for revenge, they're out to destroy, and this is a religious problem. It's not the guns.
Right. And I would say it's also just a lack of investment in education problem too. if you're not into, I could see someone being like, no, the religion thing is not something that we should be pushing, or along those lines. But even if you, again, what you said, the Ten Commandments is pretty much standardized of right and wrong, and I think everyone would agree with it. But I mean, there's no investment in education whatsoever. So there's no investment in, hey, let's bring up our kids to be good people. Let's invest in that aspect of it. It's, everything is always cut from education, and then you wonder why animals are the result of not investing in education. And to me, it's just like the lowest common denominator is the gun thing at the end. It's like, look at the start, and then let's try and invest in that. Let's try and invest in, okay, if someone does come from a family where we know that it's hard for them, let's have, some sort of mental health program throughout the school. Or how can we help troubled kids? How can we listen to them? But it always just goes to, AR-15. They would, that person who made the video saying, I want to have a mountain of skulls and a blood river. They wouldn't be able to do anything without an AR-15.
Yeah, the thing is, he didn't use an AR-15. He used pistols. So,
well, there you go. And by the way, this one specific example, there was nothing in his history. There had been no background check, red flag either. So, look, it's the simple solution. Does anyone need an AR-15? No. But the major problem is the foundation in the education system for me.
Yeah, well, I think part of the problem with the education system is the lack of proper moral guidance. Because if you're not allowed to teach anything religious in schools, first of all, what does that mean? Because I think everything's religious. The liberals, the progressives who are the most moralizing people out there, they don't realize that they're making religious arguments. Everything's oppression and racism, sexism, homophobia. The thing I always on, well, on what basis do you say that these are all bad? It's an epistemological question, because they say simultaneously that everything is relative. Everything's a social construct. It goes back to that blank slate thing. There's no universal standard of morality. There's no universal standard of right and wrong, good and evil, truth and falsehood, etc. And that's what they teach in the schools now. It's all, that's the whole thing. You do you, man. It's all just your opinion. There is no universal truth. There is no absolute right and wrong. So if you teach young people that, is it any surprise then that someone says, well, I'm God and I say everyone should die? And that's the thing, is that's moral to them. They don't think they're doing something that's evil. They think that, well, it's their moral conviction that humanity is a disgusting, depraved species and it should be dispensed with. So again, it's a religious argument, and you cannot defeat you cannot win a spiritual fight if you're not willing to fight the spiritual battle. And we are not willing to fight the spiritual battle because people just want to play it easy and say it's the guns. And there's some merit to the claim that, well, it basically happens in this country. You don't have this phenomenon in Ireland. You don't have this phenomenon in Germany. It is an American phenomenon, this idea of the lone wolf taking an AR-15 and killing a bunch of innocent people. It happens all over the world, but there's something uniquely American about the way it happens here. And the case I make is, because I do believe in the Second Amendment, but in order to have a Second Amendment, in order to have freedom in general, you have to have a moral people that are disciplined, that have some consensus on what's right and what's wrong, and ultimately they have to have religion in their lives. They have to be spiritually furnished, as I said at the end of my latest video. If you have just this sort of decadent nihilistic society that says anything goes, You do you, man. Be whatever you want to be. There's no standard of right and wrong. Well, this is what you're going to create. If you mix broken homes, secular liberal values, a very just vulgar pornographic culture with hundreds of millions of guns, people are going to start getting violent. So to put it simply, the question is, it's not what's wrong with the guns. It's, well, what's happening to men in America where they are acting like this? Why are they doing this?
Yeah, and then on the opposite side, on the right side, they don't address it either. Yeah, I was just listening to a podcast, and they're just like, well, we need security guards, and we need to have, metal detectors, and we need more guns, basically we need more security. Again, not addressing the foundational what's wrong with, like you said, what's happening to these men that is causing them to feel disenfranchised enough to then say, I'm going to go take 19 lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a big issue. And yeah, I've been noticing that this past week too. You flip on Fox News and all they're talking about is how we just need more security at the schools. We need to arm the teachers. And it's interesting. They rant about these crazy teachers teaching the kids about gender pronouns and oral sex, but then they say, let's give them guns. And I just think, no, I don't want the teachers to have guns. I support having more armed security.
How about paying teachers more so that normal people go into that profession?
Perhaps, yeah.
How about that? That could be a good solution as well. Also, the last thing, which it's apparently a controversial statement, is I think they should never, ever report on this in the mass media.
You're saying don't give the shooter's name?
Don't give the name at all.
Yeah, I
never, ever reveal that information.
Yeah.
You mentioned it. The copycat thing is, it happens every time a serial killer gets attention. There's 20 more people that die because you just gave that guy attention.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Especially in the culture that's been bred in America of look at me.
Mm-hmm. And that's what every shooter wants. They want to have that notoriety, even though they're going to be dead. They want to be remembered for that statement that they made. That was Eric Harris. They knew they were going to kill everyone and then kill themselves, but they thought that they would be hailed as gods. And they knew that this would set off a chain reaction of copycats, and that's exactly what happened. But they all say the same thing. They all say that they're going to be God when they kill everyone. So,
Well, I think we got to the main points we wanted to get to on that. It's a terrible scenario, and I just wish people would focus on the foundational issues other than the very simplistic view of guns, no guns.
Right.
Security, no security. But people can't really understand. You don't want to keep digging further because that involves research and some time and energy. So thanks for joining today.
Yeah.
I'll reach out again. I was at the Kentucky Derby. I was then in Vegas, and then I had COVID. So I had 3 weeks of no podcasting, but I'm trying to get back into it. So I'll be hitting you up. I think we should do this more often.
Yeah,
as mentioned on prior ones.
Yeah, we'll have to do one where we discuss the war in Ukraine. That's a big topic.
Will do. All right. Well, thanks for joining. We'll go out to Friday night, and I'll see you later, man.
All right.
Peace.
Friday night, I'm thinking that we just might fly away to someplace they don't know who we are. Now I'm riding shotgun in your car. We drive through the city like explorers going 65. Flowing hair flying across your face. We left on Friday, now it's Saturday. Pressed jeans buttoned up, jeans iron slipping up. Red shoes walking slow, headphones blaring 3 stacks. Sunglasses flaring out, thick watch hanging low. Studded belt pulled taut, 3 stacks on the radio. Friday night, I'm thinking that we just might run away to some place. We can be who we are. We can be who we are.